Recent military exercises in the Baltic Sea almost escalated into a new war. The peaceful exercise was interrupted when the F-22s took off to intercept an unidentified fighter jet headed directly for the flagship of the U.S. 6th Fleet. The two best crews prepared for an intense battle and put their weapons systems on full alert. Such an event means only one thing. The two fighters will face off in a battle of wills, and in the worst-case scenario, a battle of arms. To the surprise of the F-22 pilots, they were countered by a 50-year-old Soviet Sukhoi. For U.S. pilots whose aircraft took off with a full complement of 12 state-of-the-art missiles, such a target is not difficult. However, the risks associated with the destruction of a manned Russian fighter forced them to consider dozens of scenarios. But in fact, this is not an isolated case. This is not the first time that NATO forces have had to intercept Russian aircraft on their territory. In the first quarter of 2024, the number of NATO fighter jets intercepting Russian aircraft approaching the airspace of the alliance's allies increased by 25%. In 2023, the number of such flights exceeded 300. Usually, all such missions take place around Kaliningrad. But this time it was different. The SU-24 MR Fencer E took off right under Finland's nose from the Gromavo Air Base and headed for the NATO exercise site. Even experienced U.S. Navy operators did not immediately realize what had happened. This unusual situation required a quick and confident response. A pair of legendary F-22s, piloted by the best pilots of the U.S. Army, took off from the Amari base in Estonia to intercept a Russian spy. The Russian plane was detected thanks to the RQ-4 Global Hawk drone, which was on duty off the coast of Estonia.
The Global Hawk represents a huge tool in its ISR fleet to provide intelligence data to the people on the ground.
It is a rather unusual situation when a reconnaissance UAV detects an airborne target earlier than a ground-based radar.
Paving a new way for the future, a new breed of pilots coming through.
But it should be noted that the Su-24 MR is not a typical fighter. This is a reconnaissance version of the Su-24 strike aircraft, which was developed in the USSR in the 1970s. It's equipped with a wide range of intelligence equipment, including radar stations, optoelectronic systems, and electronic intelligence systems. This allows it to carry out both photographic reconnaissance and data collection on enemy electronic systems. With a maximum speed of 960 miles per hour and a range of 380 miles, it can quickly penetrate deep into enemy territory and disappear unnoticed with the information it's collected. Despite the age of the plane, it almost managed to reach Klaipeda unnoticed. The F-22 pilots were surprised by the brazenness and skill of their enemy, so they prepared for any eventuality. The Su-24, obviously realizing its real capabilities and the approaching threat, was not going to fail the mission and took a risk that could potentially start World War III. The likely target of Russian intelligence is the flagship of the 6th Fleet of the Navy, the Mount Whitney amphibious assault ship. Given the amount of state-of-the-art equipment on board this ship, finding out at least some details about it's a great success for the enemy. Particularly interesting are the radar systems. There are 3 of them on the Mount Whitney. Thanks to them, the Su-24 MR will be targeted by the Sea Sparrow missile before it can take any photos.
So the benefits are manyfold. The active duty Navy is able to operate the ship with a reduced number of active duty personnel.
The F-22 pilots must protect the Mount Whitney at all costs, so they're prepared for the worst-case scenario. The F-22 has a wide arsenal of weapons, including internal bays for air-to-air and air-to-ground missiles, as well as the M61A2 Vulcan automatic cannon. Internal compartments allow to maintain the stealth characteristics of the aircraft during combat missions, so the Russian pilot still does not notice the Raptor behind him. The Su-24 MR carries air-to-air, air-to-ground missiles, and KAB-500 or KAB-1500 guided bombs, which are particularly dangerous for U.S. ships. Since most of the weapons of the Su-24 are located under the wing, the main task of the F-22 is to approach and make sure there's no danger to the flagship. Finally, the Raptor pilot sees the enemy with the naked eye. Apparently, the pilot of the Su-24 MR has also noticed him, but so far he's not taken any action. When the F-22 pilots get close enough to see the Russian Army spy, they realize that it was not carrying heavy weapons. After exhaling, the pair of pilots began the usual procedure of escorting the enemy aircraft to ensure a safe end to the incident. Both F-22s take up positions on the sides of the SU-24MR and use all possible methods to make it clear that the Russian spy's mission has failed. However, the Russian pilot does not think so and performs a maneuver that could potentially start a war. Gaining cruising speed, it suddenly approaches the wing of an F-22 and dives down to escape pursuit. One can interpret such actions in different ways, but professionals like the Raptor pilots always keep a calm mind. Usually, the pilot must immediately report such events to the commander. Having almost lost one of the most advanced fighters, the command decided to escort the Russian plane at a safe distance. The F-22 pilots successfully completed their mission and returned to the Emory base without losses. The Soviet plane of the 70s is objectively unable to withstand the latest U.S. fighters. After using his only advantage, surprise, the SU-24MR pilot made the only possible decision to land in the Kaliningrad region. Without receiving any important intelligence, it's worth talking about the possible return of the Russian plane by the same route, for which the U.S. Air Force will be more prepared than this time. However, Russia still has many ways to test the attentiveness of NATO air forces. Given the rapid increase in the number of air intrusions, our pilots will definitely be out of work. Such emergencies are always subject to detailed analysis by the U.S. Army leadership. That's why the pilots provide a detailed minute-by-minute report on the course of the incident, its causes, and solutions immediately upon return. The possibility of damage or even loss of the F-22 is considered an extraordinary event, as no F-22 has ever been scratched by the enemy so far. Unfortunately, the decisions made on this situation remained behind closed doors. But we can guess that next time it'll not be possible to catch the NATO military off guard. Given the increasing number of illegal intrusions into NATO airspace and the aggressiveness of the enemy's actions, we should not rule out the possible use of surface-to-air missiles to shoot down an unwanted guest. But what are the consequences? The downing of a manned aircraft will automatically mean armed aggression, but the constant escalation by Russia cannot go unpunished. We have previously encountered the precedents of the downing of an American drone over the Black Sea and the downing of a fighter jet with crew over Syria by Turkey. These cases did not lead to serious conflicts, but if the U.S. or Russian crews were injured, the consequences could be very serious. Every month, the number of contacts in NATO airspace is growing, and if a political solution to this problem is not found, it could explode at any time, both literally and figuratively. Allies around the world, from the Pacific Ocean to the Baltic Sea, faced the challenge of direct confrontation. The SU-24MR incident may be another straw that eventually overflows the cup of patience. At the same time, the United States confirmed that it was going to allow the delivery of F-16 fighter jets from Denmark and the Netherlands to the Ukrainian Air Force, putting an end to months of speculation and downright teasing. Just now, we have information that the aircraft are already in Ukraine. News agencies around the world are going crazy with predictions that the F-16s will either turn the tide of the war in Ukraine or make no difference at all. We hope that in this video we'll try to solve this challenge. The F-16 is a fourth-generation multi-role fighter jet that's been the backbone of Western air forces since the 1980s. A total of 4,600 aircraft have been produced and 2,100 are currently in use in 20 countries. This makes it clear that the F-16 is the most widely used fighter jet in the world and the most anticipated for Ukraine. Together with the donation of fighter jets from other NATO allies, Ukraine should have received dozens of F-16s at the end of 2023 and even more in 2024. But at the time, the West refrained from supplying aircraft for two reasons. First, there were potential concerns that Russia would view the transfer as a serious escalation that would lead to retaliation against the United States. And second, there were some U.S. officials that believe learning to fly and logistically support the technologically advanced F-16 might be more difficult and time-consuming than it was actually worth. The first thing you need to know is how the Ukrainian Air Force has fared so far in the war with what they've had. As a former Soviet state, the Ukrainian Air Force inherited many Russian-made aircraft when it gained independence in 1991. For decades, the main fighters were old versions of MiG-29 and Su-27 aircraft. According to rough estimates, Ukraine had about 50 MiG-29 fighters and 24 Su-27s, which is not much compared to the Russian tactical aircraft of 900. However, the supposed Russian air superiority was never achieved. Ukrainian air defense systems and fighters have forced the Russian aerospace forces to be more cautious in their air missions. This allowed Ukrainian pilots to use hit-and-run tactics to punish any Russian aircraft that went too far before retreating back behind the air defense system. It wasn't all good news for Ukraine, though, and their air force suffered heavy losses in the first phase of the invasion. Ukraine lost 62 aircraft in 2022. Thanks to new tactics and a more conservative approach, these losses were reduced to 7 aircraft in 2023. If you look at the capabilities of the former Soviet MiG-29 and Su-27 fighters on paper, you'll find a lot in common with the F-16. 2 Soviet fighters were designed with a greater emphasis on air superiority. Therefore, they're actually faster and more maneuverable than the F-16. All 3 aircraft have a turnover load of about 9G. The F-16 is more of a multi-role platform for ground and air missions. It's like a Swiss Army knife of planes. This is a small performance gap, although the F-16 is about 170 miles per hour slower than Soviet jets, depending on the version. So if the F-16 is not radically better than what Ukraine already has in terms of performance, why have Ukrainian pilots been asking to fly these aircraft for years? The reality is that Ukrainian MiG-29s and Su-27s are much older versions than the same aircraft used by Russia. The Ukrainian versions of MiGs and Sukhoi are stuck in the past with inferior radar and weapons than those that Russia has on its modern versions. The Ukrainian MiG-29 can only detect aircraft at a distance of about 50 miles, while more modern Russian radars can track targets up to 100 miles away, including small radar tracks such as cruise missiles and certain drones. This way, Russia not only sees Ukrainian pilots from a greater distance, but can also shoot them first. The latest R-77 missiles can hit targets over 70 miles away, while Ukraine has nothing with that range or the ability to shoot and forget. So switching to the F-16 will completely change this equation with not only better radar sensors and electronic warfare capabilities, but also full access to the entire modern lineup of NATO armament. I didn't specify the exact range of the radar because it varies greatly depending on the specific version of the F-16 that Ukraine will receive. Among the weapons that the F-16 brings is the legendary AIM-120 AMRAAM used by the U.S. and allies since 1991. The AMRAAM has a reputation for being an extremely deadly missile, giving Ukraine the ability to reach out over 65 miles along with fire and forget capability. Russian pilots have had a huge advantage over Ukrainian Air Force until now thanks to their active radar missiles, so giving Ukraine the F-16 and a steady supply of the AMRAAM puts Ukraine on much more equal footing. Another thing you have to remember is that the F-16 is going to have an expected lifespan of between 3,500 and 4,500 flight hours, while Soviet aircraft have only 2,000 to 3,500. So the F-16 is going to be a huge advantage there. But what was holding the West back for so long, preventing them from sending the F-16? Well, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov claimed that sending F-16s to Ukraine would be seen as a nuclear threat. But this is the same strategy that Russia has employed for years now, drawing supposed nuclear red lines in the sand for any action by the West that opposes their interests, not just in Ukraine, but all over the world. So I think the leaders of the United States and Europe are tired of nuclear blackmail. In fact, there's already experience of transferring disputed weapons. A perfect example of this is the AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missile, which targets and destroys enemy radar systems to blind the enemy and neutralize their longest-range surface-to-a missile batteries. The U.S. donated these HARM systems to Ukraine around July of 2022. They had an immediate impact on Russian air search and defense systems. When installed on a modern Western aircraft such as the F-16, the HARM can connect to the aircraft's more powerful radars and sensor systems to increase the detection range, allowing the pilot to fire the missile more accurately and with a much lower chance of return fire. Still, there are some concerns about adapting to the new aircraft, and Ukrainian pilots are excited about the modern digital cockpit of the F-16. Former Soviet MiGs and Su-27s have these old analog instrument clusters with dials and gauges with very few digital displays. In contrast, the F-16 uses multi-function displays to show all the most important information in the user interface, with analog dials used as a backup for less important tasks. Digital cockpits display information better and can customize the pilot's needs by quickly switching modes in an intuitive way. This reduces the burden on the pilot's attention, and the pilot's attention is a resource that's as valuable as the aircraft itself. But learning how to fly a Western aircraft with a completely different design language from Soviet aircraft meant that even skilled pilots needed months of training to be ready for combat. The F-16 itself is also very different from Soviet aircraft. The MiG-29 and SU-27 have been in service in Ukraine for a long time thanks to the additional strength that allows them to take off from civilian airfields, highways, and ordinary roads, meaning Russians have had a hard time finding and striking the aircraft on the ground since they're always shuffling to new positions. But the F-16 is far more sensitive to airfield conditions requiring pristine chef's kiss, the perfect runways, and a lot of maintenance to keep its advanced systems functional. This limits the number of F-16 locations in Ukraine, which reduces the effective combat range of the fighters. Ukraine's been working to improve its air bases to prepare for Western jets for this reason. But the difficulties are not only in pilots and air bases, but also in aircraft maintenance. According to a Government Accountability Office report, maintenance personnel in the United States Air Force require between 23 and 133 days of training just to reach the apprentice level. A small number of trained ground crews to maintain the fighters is almost as bad as not getting new fighters at all. The cost factor should also be considered. Every AMRAAM fired costs $1.8 million per missile to produce. Western leaders have publicly commented and recommended that these costs for Ukraine be maintained as long as necessary to force Russia to back down. But the Russian strategy for continuing the war, despite the lack of progress, seems to be based on the idea that Western support is running out. But in reality, most of the military assistance coming to Ukraine is surplus equipment that the U.S. and other NATO countries were going to get rid of anyway. In the case of the F-16, Western countries have transferred their fighters to Ukraine as they're replacing old fighters with new F-35s anyway. In any case, the assistance saves money for some of these countries by eliminating the difficulties associated with decommissioning aircraft. Yes, believe it or not, decommissioning old equipment is expensive. Even if there's a long wait for the F-16 before Ukraine can fly full squadrons, starting this process now ensures that Ukraine will have access to hundreds of F-16s in the future. Even if the F-16s don't shoot down enemy aircraft for months, the mere fact that they're flying may force Russia to make a difficult choice between keeping the old airframes and preventing competition in the skies over Ukraine. What do you think? Write your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to watch our other videos on military technology to stay up to date. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more interesting details. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.